I'm Rod Carter. Thanks so much for joining us for this event today. The recent arrest of journalist Omar Jimenez and his colleagues from CNN really does underscore a tremendous need for this very conversation, a talk about the intersection of Black men and TV and Black men and news. And as we navigate this new normal called COVID-19, and sadly the old normal of Black men dying in police custody, this conversation in our place in news and in the newsroom becomes an even more vital one. So today we're going to explore a few of those topics as the Tampa Bay Association of Black Journalists, in conjunction with the National Association of Black Journalists Black Male Media Project, assembles this wonderful group of men who are going to talk about their role and what life is like for an African-American male in some of the newsrooms across this country. So we have a great group of people. We have Coley Harvey, who's a sideline reporter with Fox Sports. And we have Corey Davis, who is formerly with Channel 8 here in Tampa, now with 6 ABC Action News in Philadelphia, and friend and longtime editor, writer of the Tampa Bay Times, Ernest Hooper, who is now with another organization in a different role, but still, I'm sure, facing some of the challenges that we all face in newsrooms. And again, I'm Rod Carter. I'm a weekend anchor and reporter at WFLA. So thank you, gentlemen, for being a part of this fantastic conversation. So I'm going to kind of just begin with each of you telling everyone what you think the biggest challenge is that you faced or face now as an African-American male in your newsroom. And I'm going to start with the person who probably has the longest tenure in news on this panel, and that's Ernest. So kind of give us a little background of what you think some of the biggest challenges are that you have faced over your career as a Black male journalist.
Well, thanks, Rod, for having me. And, I was at the Times for 27 years. I left last December, and there were a confluence of factors that led to me seeking out and finding another job, not the least being the economic crunch that newspapers, including the Times, find themselves in today. And I think for this discussion, we have to talk about how those business challenges are impacting coverage of minority communities, and specifically the African American community. When these papers are forced to make cuts to staff, when they are forced to reduce their scope of coverage, in many instances, they are cutting back on how they cover the African American community. And so I think that makes this industry far more challenging for African American men, particularly those who want to cover their friends, their neighbors, and illuminate the issues that are so important in their community. When we are pulling back from that, it diminishes the role that they have and the opportunity they have to highlight probably why they got into the business. So I think that's one of the big challenges.
Coley, I'll let you speak to that next.
Yeah, well, I would say one of the biggest challenges that I've seen, particularly just looking at my career and then also looking at those of my colleagues and peers, is getting in the business in the first place, getting in the door at certain places. I have stories about the many times I was applying to jobs and I did not get a phone call back, or later heard that someone else I knew had gotten the job, and it was someone who didn't look like any one of us. And I knew that I was very qualified for that job, and that person got the phone call after I had walked through the door and done my interview and knew that I was a finalist for that job. It all comes down to race, and it all comes down to this, well, let me hire someone who's like me. Let me hire someone who looks like me. And that is certainly a big issue that I faced some 10 or so years ago. And it's something that, Ernest, I know you faced, and Rod, you faced, and some of the young journalists who are coming out today are still facing. Just kind of to piggyback on that point really quickly, just a few days ago, noticed the tweet from the union of the Sports Illustrated writers, the still existing Sports Illustrated writers. Of course, the iconic magazine has been so gutted recently, but their tweet said that as of their recent layoffs, they now have no writers who are African American. They have no Black writers who work for Sports Illustrated, a time-honored magazine. And in that tweet, the union said that was going to be at the top of their list of demands as they move forward, which is certainly a very promising sign that they're making that an important part of their path forward. But that just goes to show you what the landscape looks like for people of color who are trying to get into it, and also who are in it but are trying to navigate the next step or the next career path or what have you.
I mean, it's certainly not an easy business in the first place. And then when you add on being an African-American male, it certainly makes it even more challenging. Corey, what's been your experience?
So with my experience, I've worked in front of the camera, behind the camera over the years as I have moved up the ranks, I guess, so to say, or through the markets. And I've noticed that just sometimes, even with dealing with the community or even with the newsrooms, sometimes a full suit, a shirt and tie, the way you look just isn't enough. And that's the reality that we face. I have, friends in the industry Black men who find it a really hard time getting into higher position type jobs, going up through the markets for various reasons. But I had actually there was a news executive several years ago who told me, I think this will always stick with me, but he told me it was very difficult to find Black male reporters. And as I was having this conversation, asking, where are you looking? Are you doing this? Are you going to these conferences? What steps are you taking to try to diversify the news? And I just feel like maybe there are a lot of news executives who agree with him, but I also think that we are out there and we are willing to work. We're very qualified to do so, even with some of the barriers that we are facing. And I've definitely experienced that along the way for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Corey, diversity has to be intentional. It doesn't happen through osmosis. You have to have these executives make a committed effort to diversifying their staffs and going to the NABJ conferences and going to the regional conferences, going to historically Black universities and seeking out African-American talent. We have so many people in leadership positions who talk about the importance of diversity, but we need them to do more than talk. We need them to put their words in action.
And our perspective is very important. We come in all shades and we come from all different backgrounds. And we, within ourselves, amongst ourselves, are still very diverse as well. And I feel like just walking in the shoes, in the footsteps of a Black man alone gives us a different perspective than a lot of people in the newsroom. And it's important for us to speak up when there are opportunities for these stories to be told. And it's also important for us to give perspective and shed some light from just our viewpoint, from how we see it as well, because some people just might not know that there is this whole different side to something, and it could be a very compelling part of the story.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the next topic of discussion that I wanted to bring up, and that is the conversation of the things that have been happening over the past few days, past few weeks with the death of George Floyd. I'll give you a small anecdote, and then I'll ask you guys your thoughts about what you've had to encounter in your newsroom. So the other day, I think it was on a Wednesday, I spoke to a producer who said, and I said, you need to add this George Floyd story into your show. I was a little concerned because it wasn't there in the first place. And the response was, well, is there anything new? And I said to myself, well, of course there's stuff new. I'll find the new stuff. And I made a point to do that and get the story in there. Then I had to have another fight with a producer because it was dropped because of time. It ended up being added back in. But my question in this conversation is, during that entire conversation, there were colleagues that were sitting there who don't look like me, who were not chiming in and saying a word. And I felt like I was alone, backed in a corner, fighting, being the Black representative. I sort of feel like sometimes the president of the NAACP of where I work, because I'm the only person of color having this conversation. However, the next day when rioting and looting started, that same colleague went to the producer and pushed for that to be moved up higher in the show. So how do you, as an African-American man in a newsroom faced with dealing with the emotional stuff that affects you personally anyway, navigate through these conversations of saying, this is why this is important and this is why it needs to be portrayed in a certain way?
I think it's a role we have to assume, Rod. And it may not seem fair, but In my experience, I felt like that was a cross that I had to bear because I was one of the few African Americans. I have to take on this role. And there were moments at the Tampa Bay Times when I would read a story and all the sources in the story would be white. And I would reach out to the writer respectfully and say, hey, the next time you choose to write about this business trend or this real estate trend, and you want to add a minority voice, reach out to me. I won't be offended.
Mm-hmm.
Call me and say, hey, Ernest, do you know anybody Black who can talk about this? It's fine. We have to, sometimes those conversations are awkward, but they have to be awkward to bring about the diversity that we need. And in any media outlet has to reflect the entire community. And so I took it as my responsibility to lend voice to that. And at times, if I had to, raise my voice
Right.
to get the point across that this is important.
As do I. I mean, I do the same thing. And, they're routinely on days off. And I know this probably happens to all of you where you'll get a call from someone going, hey, do you know so-and-so, or can you connect me with such and such? And it's usually and typically the people of color in the community. And I don't mind taking on that role. But how do you impress upon your colleagues that it's not just your role, it's everyone's role to think in this way?
Well, I think, first of all, there's two things to start, and we've already touched upon this, and this is a point that I know NABJ itself is hammering home, is leadership. We have to have more of our voices and our faces in leadership in these newsrooms, at these papers, magazines, and network stations. The other part of that is, we've heard the buzzword ally a lot lately when it pertains to our white brothers and sisters, or our non-people of color brothers and sisters, or our non-Black brothers and sisters. We have to have those advocates in the newsroom as well who understand it. Just a quick story for me. I'm in TV now for the past few years I have been, but I started as a newspaper reporter. I actually wrote for the Orlando Sentinel years ago, and at that time we had a connection with the Tampa Bay Times. So it was actually still the St. Pete Times at that point. So I've had my work actually appear in that paper as well. But just piggybacking off that point, what I'm trying to say is that when I had my first job, the editor that I had there, the sports editor I had there, white man who grew up in the South, grew up in the rural South, but was very sympathetic to the point that he was in a city that was predominantly African American. I was working in Macon, Georgia at the time, and he knew that the fact that he had I was fresh out of college, a young Black reporter working in his section, that he knew that he had to give me the free rein to write essentially whatever I wanted to. I mean, I'm fresh out of college. I didn't believe him at first. I have a column. I can have a column weekly, but he was an ally. And there were moments when certain events would happen in Macon or even around the country that resonated with being not just a Black man, but a Black person in that area. And I felt it was my duty to your point, Ernest, I felt it was my duty to make sure that I'm sharing those stories, getting those opinions out there even, and in large part, just representing a community that is not historically represented in that newspaper. And I just feel like if we can extrapolate that in multiple places, it goes with having us in leadership, but also with having allies in leadership. And I don't think we have enough of that in the news business itself.
And I totally agree. It's a whole trickle down type effect, in my opinion. And just from what I've seen across the country, I feel like newsrooms everywhere could use more people of color, more diversity across the board. But here in Philadelphia, we're in a unique situation to where it's a beautiful place. It's a big city, but it also has some problems too. In Philadelphia being the largest poorest city, or the poorest large city in the country, the most poverty out of any large city in the country, that has some difficulties too. And it also requires some insight and empathy when reporting as well. And a lot of times you have to be able to connect to that and live that to really know. Just because you're Black doesn't mean you know that. But it's important to get to know your staff and figure out who does know this, who is able to relate to the big core population, the people who are watching and everything like that. But I would say it's important to be an advocate, within ourselves to speak up for each other. And it's also important to enlighten other people during opportunities, like Ernest mentioned, opportunities where they could further diversify their stories. Maybe when they go out to get those sound bites in those interviews, think about maybe, okay, we have a man, we have a woman. All right, maybe we do need somebody of another race as well to maybe be another voice in the story and to reflect the viewership and the demographics of the area.
I just want to remind everyone who's watching this as well, as it airs here online, to, if you repost this, use the hashtag #InspireBlackMen. And we chose that hashtag, of course, for a reason, because we have to inspire and lift each other up. And, you know, I want to ask a quick question. This is something I think we've probably all faced. Have you guys faced the angry black man syndrome in your newsrooms? That if you bring up a question, they always think you're mad about it, or you're pissed off, and, you know, why you got to always fight for this?
Well, I do watch the way I come at certain people, or just in general, because of that. And because I understand that sometimes that's how I could be perceived, which, you know, it's part of who I am. But I do have to sometimes check myself, like, all right, maybe I am coming off a little too strong, or I need to ease my way into this so they can hear me, you know, and so they can hear me and listen to what I'm saying.
Right.
So it just depends, but I have experienced that, yeah.
You know, I'm not often in newsrooms. Just kind of in my career, I've always kind of been bureau based or what have you. So I'm not really in the newsroom all that often. So it's kind of interesting even for me to listen to this. But what I will say is just being in sports, and obviously being a little bit separate from the rest of you, this is a space when it comes to talking about race, when it comes to talking about politics. Obviously, we hear the people all the time, stick to sports, shut up and dribble, don't talk about it. Well, there are moments where you have to bring in race, you have to bring in politics into sports, because sports are part of our general society. And, you know, if it wasn't for Jackie Robinson, where would we be, you know, for example. But all that's to say, there are those moments where, yeah, I feel like I've got to measure what I say, or how often I you know, drumbeat on something because of what the viewer or the reader may say, because there is that hesitance to associate, or I guess not even a hesitance. There's that connection with, if you're a black man and you're politically thinking or politically leaning in sports, there's something wrong with you. You're an angry black man. You're not supposed to be here. Why are you in this space? And it's unfortunate that you have to, you know, feel those arrows and those barbs and take that on, but that is the case. So there are moments where, you know, I think I'm a fairly politically active person. I pay attention to the news, obviously, whether it's the news right now or on just a random Tuesday, I'm paying attention. That being said, in my role, I can't always speak on everything, but there are moments where you can pick and choose, I feel like, and I think you still have that same resonance. And I feel like I've done that okay in my career, and I know that other writers have as well in sports. But at the same time, it is difficult. It is one of those things where you feel like you are being pigeonholed into that angry black man that's always talking politics and race. But I'm sorry, this is part of who we are. You know, we have to all accept it.
I would echo a lot of what you said, Coley. And I think my experiences when I first started out in the business, I have to say I carried more anger. I was a little more on edge, just I think because of my youthful energy. And eventually what I learned is that I had to ask myself, what am I trying to achieve? When I raise this issue, what am I trying to achieve? Am I just trying to piss off the editor or piss off management, or am I trying to influence how they run the newsroom? Am I trying to influence how they deliver coverage? Once I kind of took that posture, it helped me calm down and have more success in influencing the decisions that they made. But there are times where anger can be effective. And there are some moments where you have to provoke people to sit back and take the issue that you're bringing to the table seriously. what I heard you say, Cole, is you have to kind of pick and choose your battles. And I
Yes.
think that's so accurate. But there are times where you have to battle. And that label, Rod, angry black man, it's placed on us to mollify us, to make us feel like we're doing something wrong. And we have to resist that label. We can't let them put that on us, because we know, as we are always a minority in the newsroom and in our society, and as such, we have a responsibility to carry that banner and to try to make a difference for our community.
Yeah, I think for me personally, the situation dictates my response. So some days I will quietly let it go, or some days I will push a little bit harder. Most times I will say I try to just articulate the reason why I think something is important to do. Now, I'll tell you, the other day I was trying to get them to cover something, and the manager said, "Yeah, I don't have anybody to send." And so my immediate thought was, that's a load of crap, because it's a Zoom interview. But my face was like, okay. And I just walked away. And the next thing I know, it was like, what was that face? And I said, it was a face of confusion about why we can't record a Zoom interview. But okay, that's what you say. But we got it. And that was the bottom line. So I didn't yell and scream, but my face kind of yelled and screamed. And, later the manager said I gave him the "you're an effing idiot" face. And I was like, did I? Because that's not what my intention was. But if it worked, is what I was thinking. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well,
and I think the challenge is that so often we feel like, well, if I don't cover this, no one will, so I have to cover it. And then we kind of fall into being pigeonholed as the black reporter. And as you said, Corey, we need allies. We need everyone to engage in covering all the diverse communities. And we can't allow ourselves that. I mean, that would be my advice to some younger reporters coming up. Don't allow yourself to be pigeonholed as the quote unquote black reporter.
right.
You have to try to change the culture of your newsroom if that's happening.
And sometimes what it takes is to do that by example, to lead it by example and show the importance of covering these black stories. Like, Philadelphia is rich in history, and there was a story in particular that I really was passionate about covering during Black History Month. And I came in on a Saturday and shot it with a photographer who works on a Saturday. And it aired during the week, but I was like, we didn't have time to shoot it during the week, so I'll just do it on a Saturday. And it worked out perfect, because particular story, there was an event going on and it tied in. So I made it happen.
I was going to say, there are times when, just because of the nature of what we do, it's difficult to get to everything. So how do you then stress the importance of certain coverage to managers who, verbally say they get it, but then they're faced with, like, I have 3 reporters and 4 lead stories, and you want me to cover this? So how do you, it seems like always a push and pull. Like, how do you navigate that? I haven't been as successful, I think, as I want to be. So y'all please help me out, because I'm really trying to figure this out.
I know for myself, I wasn't always successful either. Before I got to Fox Sports, I was at ESPN for several years, and within that, at one point, I was a journal assignment reporter for SportsCenter, and so that was sometimes raising your hand and saying, "Hey, this story is going on. Can we do this?" And they were very much encouraging you to suggest story ideas. But I did feel like there were times I'm suggesting stories that are interesting to me. Maybe it's because I'm a black man, I don't know, but I'm suggesting stories that I think that the broader populace would be interested in, and it'd be shot down. And it's, as you guys well know, it is so discouraging. And it is even more discouraging when it's something that is a part of you, when it's something that has to do with your culture or your identity, or just something that you're passionate about. So I don't know. I don't really know the full answer to that question, other than say I didn't have a whole lot of success, but you just kind of keep pushing and you keep trying to get it.
Yeah.
For me, I tried to pull out all the stops to the story and just show that I can make these stories interesting and compelling enough to where somebody who might not have that same background could potentially relate to it. And that's even more difficult to do sometimes. but I at least put the effort in to be like, okay, how can I make this something that everyone, all the viewers will be like, oh, okay, that's interesting, or it's difficult, but I mean, I try. So it
Yeah.
doesn't always work.
I think one of the keys is to try to frame stories not as a Black story, but as a community story.
Mhm.
This is something the whole communities. Yes, it's about Black History Month, but Black History Month is something the entire community needs to take an interest in. And the other argument I think you can make is this will be good for ratings. This will drive subscriptions. This will do well on the website. We have to speak. That's kind of speaking to their imperative. I think so often we tend to think, well, I got to lean on the moral imperative. This is the right and just thing to do. But you also have to mix in a little bit about, hey, I'm trying to help us with the broader mission.
Yeah. I want to pivot for a second. So we've all watched these very stark images of protests and the things that have happened in Minneapolis and Atlanta and Dallas, and I mean the list of cities goes on and on. As a person of color, a man, how do you navigate emotionally watching and covering this? I mean, I'll be perfectly transparent. For me, the last few days of watching a lot of this has made me sad. And when I watch the stories during a broadcast, I have to like almost turn things off just so I can get through it because it's hard to watch. How do you handle that emotionally?
For me, it's a work in progress for how I handle it. But unfortunately, this isn't the first time I've even had to cover these types of situations, these kind of stories. Like my first one, I was there covering it in person. The Walter Scott shooting in Charleston, North Charleston, South Carolina. And that officer was charged with murder eventually. But that was my first experience with covering something like this. And it took a lot of talking to people, uh, really being sure that I'm reporting the story, but it's also a balance with how much personal touch do I put on it, and in what way do I do that. I struggle with that now too. And just with this recent one, it's watching the video is I had to stop watching the video because I found myself watching it over and over and over with so many questions, trying to figure out why and what's going on, and picking apart every single angle of the video. I even struggle with how do I do it on social media? How do I share these stories? Because on social media, people are a lot more free, as we know. They comment and say what they want to say behind their computers, behind their cell phone. So I always struggle with what do I share? When do I share it? How do I share it? What do I write when I say it? When I share it? There's a lot of thought that goes into it.
That's a challenge for any journalist, any Black journalist, I should say, to try to cover the story dispassionately and separate your personal emotion. That's really difficult. I think, my advice is always try to be intellectually honest. We used to say try to be unbiased, but every journalist brings a history and a personal background to the stories that they do. What you have to do is make sure this story is intellectually honest. It doesn't necessarily mean fair and balanced. It means presenting the facts in a way that lend clarity to the situation. But it is a challenge, and I've gone through a range of emotions since the death of George Floyd. It's been troubling, and it's a pattern of what we've seen, and it saddens me that we haven't made more progress. A lot of people are pointing to a quote from Dr. King about riot is the language of the unheard. He made that quote in 1967. It still applies today. The fact that it still applies 53 years later is an indictment of the lack of progress we've made.
For me, obviously, again, it's a little bit different because I'm not actually on the front lines covering. Have not been on the front lines covering a protest or a rally. Um, and obviously in my role, I can't attend, even though I'm there, maybe in solidarity and spirit,
Mm-hmm.
it wouldn't look right for me to be there. So in order to kind of keep my sanity and my sense of peace through all this, I have tried, going back to what we said earlier, I have tried to pick those moments when I speak out and say something on social media, or if there is a game that I'm working that happens to be going on as something is going on the outside, then yes, I'm going to say some 2 cents, or I'm going to figure out a way to kind of wiggle something in there very subtly that people may not even first pick up on, but then later say, oh, he was actually making a little bit of a statement there. One of the things that I'm proudest of within the past week is, it was kind of just after we saw the initial protest that got out of hand, that turned into a riot in Minneapolis. And then actually, I guess it was the same day that Omar Jimenez was arrested.
Mm-hmm.
Waking up and seeing that image, I don't know Omar, but we're based in the same city, went to the same university, from the same hometown. He's a couple years younger than me, but we're very much walking that same path. That hit me. I talked a lot with my parents that day about what it was like for them to see him and putting me in his shoes. So I knew when that happened, I had to say something. I had to do something, and I came up with with some words. I just wrote something down that was on my head, just get it out on the paper, and I turned it into a couple-minute video. And I've had a lot of people, white, black, brown, whomever, who have identified with it. It has resonated. And I only bring that up to say there are those moments when you are a sports reporter where you do have to step back and say, this is the world. This applies to me. I've got to show that I'm a human being too. And I think that's given me peace through all this, is to be able to say, let me get what's on my mind, on my chest, get it off. And it's been refreshing to see that there are other people that are hoping that we can build towards something more positive once we get through these days that we have to go through.
Are you guys barraged with questions from African American colleagues about your feelings about this? And I asked that because during a commercial break the other day, someone said to me, as a Black man, are you afraid when you go out? And I just kind of told him a quick story about how, yeah, because this could happen to any one of us. I was stopped for weaving, and they searched my car for drugs. And so there was zero connection to this, but how I responded was different. And I told him, quite frankly, because I work in television and I'm, on TV, it gives me a pass, a little bit. Omar got arrested, but it gives me a little bit of a pass in the sense that they go, oh, you're the guy. So for me, the struggle is just emotionally dealing with what I watch and then what I have to report. How do you guys keep, and I don't want to say keep your sanity, but really keep yourself mentally fit when you're watching these images of someone who could easily be you?
Yeah, like the first part of what you said, Rod, when you said people ask how we feel, people in the workroom. I can't think of a time, maybe once, like over the course of my career, that someone has seriously asked me how am I doing, how am I feeling, like just a colleague or whoever. Not to knock anyone or anything in the past, but it just hasn't happened. And maybe it should actually. I think maybe that should be something that happens. But as far as like mental well-being, I just talk through things with people because it's something that you can't walk around and hold in. You got to talk about it, and you have to have an outlet in some way. So some people's outlets are on social media. Some people talk face to face, over the phone, FaceTime, call up a friend. I try to do all of it, but that's what I need personally to be mentally okay, to to keep going as these situations keep happening.
I've actually had some conversations with colleagues over the years, and I've been thinking about them a lot in the last couple of days, where it was genuinely colleagues who I worked with who were curious. I don't really know what would get us off onto those conversations, how they would begin, but it would be almost like them asking, does this really happen? Have you actually noticed this happening? And then I share my stories, the times I've been pulled over, the time I did get away from God knows what could have happened because the guy asked me if I was in school. And I said, no, sir, I actually work. I'm a reporter with ESPN. And he hands me my license and everything. Oh, well, be careful. Make sure you don't tailgate that truck. I wasn't tailgating the truck. You followed me for 4 miles before you pulled me over. When I share stories like that, they are just flabbergasted. I had a conversation just yesterday with some colleagues of mine just via text message, and they were stunned to know that for somebody that they actually know that they're close to, that these things do happen. So the conversations, you're absolutely right, Corey. The conversations must be had in order for all of us to keep our sanity, not just us, but them as well. That said, as far as how I keep my sanity right now, it's hard with this quarantine. I like getting outside a lot. And the one thing that I have been able to do is ride my bike a lot around the city of Chicago. It's been nice. It's been good to just kind of free my mind, get some sun on a nice day, and to just kind of focus on the bike path and try not to think about everything else. But then, of course, when you get home, and even when you are riding, I mean, when I see police, because of who I am, because I am a Black man, I see a cop and I'm trying to go another way. I'm trying not to interact in any kind of way that could possibly get me in trouble. So it is on your brain, but that still is a release enough.
Yeah, it never leaves you.
Right.
And the challenge for me and what frustrates me so much is that I now have to have these conversations with my sons,
Right,
who are both in their 20s, and I have to remind them about what to do if you're pulled over by a police officer. And our job as a society was to give them a better world, was to try to create a place where they didn't have to endure the same worries and concerns that I endured and that my father endured. And we haven't quite done that. So it is frustrating. But what I try to do is talk to friends to cope, and talk to mentors, talk to someone who's a little older who can, in my instance, it's someone who often brings calm to my anger and anger to my calm. When I'm calm about something, he goes, hey, no, you need to get fired up about this. And then when I'm angry about something, hey, remember, you work for someone and we need your voice and you can't lose your place going off on this particular issue. Rod, to get back to what you said originally, when someone comes and asks, how do you feel? It's a double-edged sword. On one hand, you're trying to understand why they aren't upset. What do you mean, how do I feel? You should be as upset as I am.
Right.
It's not just a Black man who was suffered from police brutality. It was a man.
Yeah.
You care about humanity.
A human.
On the other hand, I appreciate that they're reaching out and inviting a conversation and willing to dialogue about the issue, because we have others who don't see it as impacting their life, so they don't even care. They don't even want to talk about it. So, there's a balance there that you have to strike.
I always look at it sort of as an opportunity for education.
Yeah.
I mean, I literally, and this blows my mind, it's somebody I've worked with for about 20 years. We're having this conversation, and I was telling this other person who asked me how I felt and was I nervous when I'm out in public, and I told her about the situation of being stopped, and it was the same thing. I mean, I think it's so funny that we all have that similar story if we're in this business, like, oh yeah, okay, well, you wouldn't do that. You take care. That kind of thing. But this woman said to me, she was like, oh, cops would never stop you. You dress too nice. And I mean, literally, I stopped for a second. I said, my clothes have absolutely nothing to do with this. And for the record, I don't wear a
that you're
suit
dressed nicely
on my day off.
might encourage them to stop you.
Right. Yeah.
But it baffled me that that was a response from that person. And I thought to myself, this is an opportunity not for me to like snap and go crazy, but to educate and go, it's not what I have on, it's what I look like.
Sure.
That's the reason this will happen. So I don't know. I found it interesting though that we kind of keep having these continuous conversations about this. But I really think it's important. Do you think we pay enough attention as Black men to our mental health and what we have to deal with? I mean, we see a lot of stuff in this business. Do you think we care enough? And what do we do? How do we fix that? How do we get other brothers to stop and go, I need to at least have a conversation to get this off my chest so at least I can express it?
I think we do care. I just don't think we know how to take care of it. So I say that I just by and large, I don't think Black men, whether we're journalists or not, I don't think we take care of our mental health well. I know even for myself, there have been times I say, I should probably talk this out with somebody, but I bottle it up, just because that's that instinct to, I don't want to concern my family with what's going on because, yeah, it's a big deal. It's a big deal to me, but they don't even know about it. I think we just as Black men, period, not having to do with journalism, we do have struggles with figuring out how to get those outlets. Granted, I think when we are together and we're trading stories and we're even having moments like this where we're talking to each other this way, this helps. These types of conversations help. But I don't know if we know how to actually seek that out. That's just on the by and large from what I've seen.
Well, I think there's a stigma attached to getting treatment for mental health, and that stigma is larger in the African American community, anecdotally speaking. And so when we talk about important stories that we need to do as journalists, that's one of them. Is focusing on that stigma and illuminating the fact that it's okay to ask for help, and that applies to what you're doing in Philadelphia, Corey, and Coley, that applies to what you're doing in the sports arena. Athletes, particularly professional athletes, carry themselves with this bravado, and often that bravado is hiding some deep-seated issues that need to be addressed. So whenever we get a chance to talk to someone, particularly an African American man who has sought and received therapy or mental health treatment, then we need to do that story and send a signal to the rest of the community. It's okay. It's okay to reach out for help.
Yeah, it doesn't make you weak to do that.
Not at all.
And we're actually seeing more athletes who are coming out and saying that and having those stories told. I believe Damian Lillard is one player who's coming to mind who's been out there. Kevin Love, who's not Black, Kevin Love has come out, and that helps. So
when you talk to other Black men in the business, what are you guys talking about? Are you just talking about sports? Are you talking about news? Or what's their biggest, what's the other brothers that we talk to, what are some of the biggest concerns we have? For me, it seems like one I talk about a lot is how to get jobs, and then how to keep jobs, and then how to get promoted in said jobs.
I talk about that a lot, but right now I'm talking about George Floyd and all of that and how to navigate through that. And even as I speak, there's like a protest happening in the city right now. Hopefully, it's peaceful. I have to follow up on that. But I talk with them about what's happening currently in my life, usually. And we keep it real because it's between us. We get to talk about how we really, how we actually feel about the situation.
Right.
That's what I usually do. And that helps too.
It really does. It really does help to just get that stuff off your chest. And it helps to have people, and I'm not just gassing you up, Ernest, but it really does help to have people like Ernest because, you've navigated a lot of this territory, a couple of years before some of us. I'm a lot older than people realize, so I'm right behind you. But it really helps to have brothers who you can lean on to talk to who've kind of been through it and navigated, help you find your way through some of this stuff.
Yeah, we're having this conversation today, but we should probably be having this conversation more often, and we should probably be inviting more people. And now that COVID-19 has pushed us into this virtual world, we don't have an excuse. We can get together now across state lines and gather and converse and lean on each other. And, you know, that's part of mentorship. And the next step would be inviting some younger people who are aspiring to get into the business and let them sit in on this conversation and let them hear what we're going through and let them know that we're here to help. That's so important for our high school kids, our college kids who are aspiring to be like us. They need to see us first and foremost, and then they need to know that if they reach out, we'll be willing to have a dialogue with them.
Yeah, I think once you open that door, they'll be willing. I got a call this morning from a kid I mentor, and he said, "Hey, I'm going to cover this protest. It's the first time I've ever covered something like this. What do I ask?" You know, and I'm thinking to myself, wow, this is, it almost gives me a refreshing of the business, because I'm thinking, well, you know, first it's 9:30 in the morning. Let me like wake up fully. And then, you know, so I have this conversation.
Right.
But that is so important for us to be able to do. And so, listen, I thank you guys so much. This has been a great conversation. I'm going to give each of you, and I'll start with Coley, I'll give you each of you an opportunity to just say a few final words, some parting thoughts for the folks who are watching, and, you know, to inspire the rest of us who are in this business.
Yeah, well, I will say just real quick to piggyback off you guys, mentorship is key. Mentorship, I mean, I have two very close mentors who I've had since I was in college, and they, to this day, are still very good friends of mine. So I definitely encourage that and encourage that growth. Just parting shot, I just want to say, you know, there are days in this business, whether you're in TV or print, where it may seem dark and it may seem like we're not going to hit that corner, but we're going to get there, and those opportunities are going to come, whether they're just an opportunity for a journalist or opportunities for Black journalists. We're going to get there. We're going to turn that corner. And even with what we're dealing with in the world right now, especially in this country, I've had friends of mine, white, Black, or whatever, who don't really see this right now, but I am feeling very optimistic that we're standing at a point where things in this country can change. It's up to us and people like us to share these stories and to have these dialogues with ourselves and then also with others in order to inspire that change. But I think that change is actually finally going to come once we get through some of these days we're in right now. But anyway, thank you guys for having me as part of this. I'm so excited to have been here.
Thank you for your voice. Corey.
And I'm really glad and fortunate to have been part of this as well. I want to say, be sure that we are advocates amongst ourselves and also advocates for unheard stories that should be told. And maybe some people don't realize that they haven't stepped up enough. I think there can always be more that could be done in a newsroom, especially from Black men, minorities, just to raise awareness and to be sure that these stories are getting covered. When it comes to being a Black man, I see it as being a minority within the minorities. So it's really important that we all also communicate and find ways to lift each other up as well, and maybe even open a door for someone, network, reach out to somebody you think might be a good fit for a job at your station. I know, Rod, you do that a lot too. So, you know, that's really important to continue, because you just never know who you might help along the way. I know for me, mentoring is a big part of what I try to do. Community activities are what I try to do. I try to really get into schools as well, because I remember as a kid, I never saw a Black reporter on my favorite TV station that I actually got a chance to start my career at. And so it was monumental in many ways for myself, but it's also important to get into the schools. It's also an easy thing to do, to go talk to a class, a journalism class. Even elementary schools have journalism classes. All this can be a way for us to be involved and just get our faces out. Very important.
And
Yeah, I'll close by saying I've enjoyed this conversation, gentlemen. Never forget that someone's watching you. There's someone out there younger than you, someone who may be on the same level as you, who's watching you, and they may not say anything, but they're watching how you carry yourself. They're watching how you conduct yourself. And you have the opportunity to set an example for them. Secondly, to echo what Corey said, it's so important to get into the schools. And here in Florida, we had a Florida Scholastic Press Association. They are often having conventions with aspiring high school journalists. And that's a great bridge to connect with those students. And just to see you at that regional conference or that state conference can make a difference. And then when you actually engage them, you're making even a bigger difference. And finally, I want to say to any managing editor, any hiring manager, if you're having trouble finding minorities, reach out to me. I won't be offended. Call me. We can talk about it. And if I don't have the answer, I'll call Rod, or I'll call Corey, or I'll call Coley. We'll find some people. Just give us a chance. Give us a chance to help you. We want to help. We want to help bring diversity to your newsrooms.
Thank you, gentlemen, again, for this very robust conversation. It's been fantastic. And again, I want to echo something that you said earlier, Ernest, that diversity has to be intentional. So we encourage all managers, everyone, to make sure that your newsrooms reflect the people that they serve. Make that an effort. Go out and do that. And like you said, if you have questions, there are lots of us around there. The Inspire Black Men hashtag will get you a number of Black men that you can reach out to. Just put that in Twitter, put that in Instagram. You will find a lot of folks. And again, use that hashtag when you post this on there. So thanks everybody for joining in. We really appreciate you being here. Have a great day and go out and be fantastic journalists that I know you will.